Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 41st Annual Statewide Historic Preservation Conference. And this session is titled, What You Don't Know Can Hurt You, The Importance of Early Investigation and Research. I'm Amy Spong, the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this session. If you experience any technical issues, please use the private chat function to send a message to myself. It's the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office title. The session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. As a registrant, you will automatically receive access to the recording after the session is completed. As we begin, we want to recognize that Minnesota history spans at least 13,000 years. The vast majority of that time is represented by American Indian history alone. And from that perspective, our urban and rural built environments are very recent. The state of Minnesota, as it's been known since 1858, is within the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples. The 11 tribal nations in Minnesota are our partners in advocating for recognition and protection of the state's cultural resources, along with other Native nations with historical connections here. SHPO is currently in the final stages of updating our statewide historic preservation plan for the next decade. Among other goals, we seek to broaden the scope and equity of historic preservation through identification and historic designation of more properties important to tribes and underrepresented communities, including traditional cultural properties, cultural landscapes, archaeological sites, and buildings and structures. We encourage you to be part of this effort, to work with us and others to build partnerships and advance historic preservation efforts across the state. We've set aside time at the end of this session for Q&A, and we'll get to questions as time allows. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Heidi Granke is an architect, interior designer, and preservation planner with more than 25 years experience. And Chris Hartnett is a structural engineer with over 20 years of experience. If you'd like to learn more about Heidi and Chris's professional backgrounds, you can find their detailed bios and contact information on the Minnesota SHPO conference homepage. With that, I'll turn it over to both Heidi and Chris, who will start off the presentation.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us early in the morning here. So the reason why we wanted to present on this topic is that we understand that preservation projects are a little bit different than new construction projects, and the way they progress is different. And there's a lot more need for time up front on a project. So we're going to go through here. We're going to talk about kind of why you need that additional time up front, what's involved in that. And then we're going to go through some case studies of some projects that should have had more time up front and some that the time up front actually saved a lot in the project. So good and bad examples. So I'll just jump in. So here, this gray line kind of represents the kind of the workload distribution on a typical new construction project, where you have just a little bit of work up front and your work gradually increases over the time of the project until most of the work is in the construction document phase. In a rehabilitation project or restoration project, we have a lot more time that we need to do up front because we do so much more up front that actually informs some of the later phases of the work. So it actually redistributes some of the workload earlier in the project. It does also take us a little bit longer overall to do the design work on a restoration project. So we just want to make sure that people realize that sometimes our clients don't realize that they pay us based on this new construction scenario, but we're actually doing the work based on the real life scenario of working on a rehab project. So why is this so important? The further into a project that you get, the more a change in the project scope changes the cost of the project. So the more research and investigation and all of that stuff we can do up front on the project, the more we can avoid some unexpected changes at the end of the project. This is particularly important if you have limited funding on your project, if you're grant funded or something like that, or this is just a really important thing to keep in mind. So that extra money that you may have to kind of put up front for us to do this extra work is going to pay off at the end of the project.
Okay, this is Chris Hartnett, and welcome. I'll say another welcome. It's good to be with all of you, my friends and colleagues and fellow preservationists. It's great to be part of this. I will tell you that I am talking to you on my phone as my computer is not able to connect up, so it's a little bit. I feel like I'm kind of trying to paint a ceiling standing on a bucket with one leg, so you have to excuse me for that. But here we go. I hope that audio is okay. Okay, so a couple things that I'll kind of give you my take on this. My experience with this is that new construction basically has 4 clients: the public, the architect, the code official, and the building owner. And we could argue that there's more. There's the environment and society and different things. But I guess this is a little old. So but they, if we say those are kind of the 4 clients in the room, then if you go to the next slide, the existing building projects has 5 clients, the same 4, and then there's the building, which is really the toughest client. And something that all of us who've done this, and if we've done it the first few times kind of poorly, we didn't realize it and we learned our lessons. And hopefully the next slide will give you some reasons why it is the toughest client. The building, I mean, it's quite stubborn. It doesn't move. It doesn't give in. It doesn't allow you to convince it that it should do something it doesn't want to do. So and basically it's very expensive to change. It's one thing for an architect to say to a structural engineer, I need to move that column. So you go into Revit and you move a box and it's all changed and everybody responds to it. Well, in a building, it's there and we have to do something physically to it. So it's much more expensive. It's mysterious. It's usually covered, so we don't really know what's there. I mean, how many times have you put down to remove a wall and find out it's a bearing wall? And there's just never enough money to investigate up front. And so as designers, we have to decide how much of that investigation is done up front by us and how much of it do we leave for the contractor and deal with it through the RFI process. And that's always a hard thing to do. It's certainly more expensive to do it on the back end, but again, we never have enough money up front. And it's time consuming. It takes many hours to investigate. And as a result, it's a budget buster. It's just, I mean, I've spent months in old buildings trying to understand what was there. So, usually, and budget is structural. With an existing building, it really, they'll grudgingly give you 1.5, but it usually takes 2.5 or more. 2 to 2.5 if it goes well. And then if you run into real problems, it'll be more than that. So, okay, I'm done.
So there's 3 main tasks that we like to do before we start design on the building. So we want to do the historical research on the building, which includes a lot of different things. So we'll kind of go through this point by point further on. So I'm not going to get into it right now. The second part is this documentation of the existing conditions, and then the actual building itself, and then the conditions. These are all related and interrelated. So one will inform the other. We may be doing some work on the building, which we identify a couple of building components, and then we go back and we do research on those components. So we've divided this as 3 things, but these really happen simultaneously and are interconnected. So who needs to be on this kind of pre-design team? Really, it's anybody that's going to be working on the project, but then there's a few other people that we might add in that might not be on a typical project. So architectural and art conservators, materials testing laboratories. We may be working with building suppliers just to make sure that we can get materials we need to repair things. And we may need some special access to look at things. So we may bring in some people for that. So the first thing we start with is historical research. We always start with kind of what's the most available. So the secondary research is usually, the National Register nominations or historic structures reports. And the key thing here is we look at the bibliographies and the keynotes on these and see where the primary sources are. And then we go look at those. One thing I just should note, I mean, these are pretty standard, I think pretty everybody's pretty familiar with these. But don't forget to look in the building itself, behind the furnace, in the boiler room, or in the attic, or the basement. This example here, this is Oregon State Hospital that I worked on several years back. And in this building, kind of in front of the main building, this 1960s building, in the basement, there was an archive that had more historic photographs in it than all of the other archives that we looked at. And they were just piled in a box, right? So we had a portable scanner and we scanned all of them. This was one of the photos that was in there. But ironically, in this project, not only were all of those photos there, but this fountain that's in front of the building was actually in that archive as well. So we were actually later able to restore the fountain. So you never know what you're going to find when you're doing this research. So what are you looking for? Obviously, you're looking for any type of building drawings, specifications, maintenance records, if you have them, are a great source of information. Information specific to the builders, the designers, or the tenants, any legal stuff. And then don't forget about simple things like family photographs, if it's a home, or institutional photographs, if it's an institution. So.
And then there's always the, the building codes for existing buildings that we have to keep in mind. Of course, the IBC chapter 24, I'm sorry, chapter 34 kind of gives some information on that, and it refers to a number of different references. But that's always, the IBC is a good place to start. Let's see, and then to the extent that you can, you want to try to find any existing drawings that you for this building or similar buildings by the same architect. These drawings are worth their weight in gold, because they will show you oftentimes what's behind behind those walls, and for the structure, what's in that concrete, really, because so much of any kind of concrete structure is how the rebar in there, and you just don't know that unless you have that information and contest it. Of course, even when you see that on the drawings, it doesn't mean they're necessarily as built. You do have to do some checking on that. But in this one, we did the Pantages Theater back in the 2000s, and we were able to get the information from the Tacoma Pantages, and we got a sense of what the architect was doing with that. So, and especially the architects, they used Jimmy Lakovic and crew used that quite extensively to help understand that. To the extent that you can get some pictures of the building, and remember, obviously, and I know I'm speaking to the choir, so many of you, but these buildings have gone through a number of iterations. So you really, even though you have the original drawing, doesn't mean that's what's there. And so again, this is again the Pantages, the lobby, and this shows the different iterations that you went through. So any kind of research you can do up front is really a great way to go. Newspaper research helps. Sometimes it provides some things too. So you have to be a little bit creative. I'll say that on the state capitol project, when we did it, one of my first bits of information was just a guidebook that I found first time I went into the Capitol, and at their visitor's desk, they had a little guidebook that I picked up that had a reference to a 1901 letter. So that's pretty good stuff. So anyway, okay. And of course, the IEBC, something to go into, dig into. There's a lot of opportunities there to get to get some special considerations for existing buildings that you don't have for new. Of course, we have the Minnesota Conservation Code for existing buildings that I've used in the past, and it really is a compilation of the IEBC. And a number, it also has fire ratings for historic materials. So, anytime you can become conversant with these different these different publications, it's important to be familiar with those.
So I guess I'm just going to interject. One other thing that's helpful is sometimes if you know under which building code the building was built under, you can look up those standards as well, and that can give you some clues on how the building was built as well. So.
Yeah, that's really key because you know, if you can structurally, if you don't add any load to something and it met code at the time that it was built, you know, you can't grandfather that in. So, but it's important to know when that code is. So more building research, you know, study historic documents. Like I said, I found a reference to a letter to Cass Gilbert from Grunwald Aus in 1901, and was able to go to the New York Historical Society and find that letter, and that led me down a path of investigating what I thought was a potential instability of the dome, and I've got it as a case study at the end. It was quite interesting research.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I'm going to speed us up a little bit here. Sorry. So the other thing is just doing research specific to materials as well. This example I'm showing here actually happened to be an old brochure from a stain and varnish company that was in the project information in the archives of MoMA for the McCormick house, which is the niece house I worked on. We'll show that more later as well.
Yeah, so these are some more publications that I use. You know, if you don't have a Kidder Parker, I would strongly suggest you go out and find one. I got mine for $16 before Amazon was around, and you know, it has all kinds of just terrific information for the architects and the builders. It's a compilation of you know, anything from acoustics to new elevators to footings. There's a AISC for structural engineers out there as a rehabilitation and retrofit guides, very good. And then the AISC standard guidelines for structural condition assessment of existing buildings. That's terrific in that it has a table of all the different tests that you should do for the different materials. It's invaluable. Hey Heidi, one housekeeping. I don't have the slide number in front of me, so I can't do the timekeeping quite so well as I had hoped.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're doing it.
Yeah,
okay.
that's why I'm trying to move the slides a little bit quicker. We're running a little slow here, so.
Sounds good. This is again, as you find systems within a building, this is an old Bustabino cantilevered stair, and I was able to, you know, just literally cantilevering off the walls. I had no idea what it was, and I was able to go in and find his patent for it. So I learned what that was. So, you know, again, be creative, fascinating stuff, but you really do have to kind of look around. You do have to be a bit of a sleuth on this stuff.
So the building itself often gives us a lot of historical clues as well, so which will help us date a building. So some component of the building may give us clues that will inform other components of the building. This is just a, you know, kind of the classic, you know, different types of nails, you know, different sizes of wood framing, different types of rivets and bolt connections and that kind of thing. And then also just the color of the finishes in the room. If they're, you know, you can go back to the original finish colors. You know, we all know what 70s colors look like. If you find those in a room, you know that's what it's from, right? So those are all clues that we look for in the building itself that help inform that historical research. So we also want to research other projects and guidelines for doing this. So these are just a few of kind of the resources that are out there. There's a lot more, and that, you know, if you can find another project that's really similar, like, you know, a similar theater or a similar fort, or, you know, some other project that was either built with the same standards or built by the same architect, that's also helpful.
Yeah, and so a lot of those references will tell you how these things are built. This is just, there's 3 or 4 slides now with just a number of different kind of sketches that I found, really, I think mostly in Kidder Parker, but in some others too. And they just allow you to see and understand what's there in front of you. So yeah, this is just kind of the wealth of information that's available to you. So it's really good stuff, and it's, you know, well worth your time to do that research, and also just to reach out to those of us in the industry asking for that. I'm happy to provide any information I can. We're all kind of in this together, so it's really fun to help people. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. So the other thing that we need to research is just the availability of craftspeople to do some of this work. This is the Conrad Schmidt studio in Wisconsin. You know, they've done some of the work at the state capitol, but they've done work all over the country. And there's some things that we can't replicate because there aren't craftspeople available or there aren't the original materials available. So that's one of the things that we have to look at up close so that we understand that as we move forward. So the next thing we do is we just got to do some measurements. And there's all the standard ways that we measure, but sometimes we have to use something unique. This is some work I did at Fort Point in San Francisco. We had some underground cisterns that were full of water. So we actually measured them with sonar. I know there's a presentation coming later in this conference on some underwater archaeology and preservation stuff. So I'm interested in that since I got to dabble in a little bit of sonar stuff myself. So here's just some of the kind of standard tools. I'm sure you're all familiar with all of these. And then of course we record it. And there's several different ways. This is just a hand sketch, which is kind of the old school way, I guess, of doing that.
Yeah, and you know, and I have this slide as a little bit of background. This is the Pillsbury A mill that we were investigating, and the reason I have this on there is because if you look at that front wall, you might be able to see it. It's bowed in quite a bit, and actually it's bowed in about 2.5 feet out of plumb. So the question was, the owner of the building was trying to turn it into a hotel. It's been since turned into artist lofts. But he was asking, you know, why is it bowed, and can I put a couple hundred people into it? And so because it was my signature, I had to do the investigation. So I went in and I measured how out of plumb it was. I had some ideas that, so on the left you can see where I'm just kind of measuring the existing columns, beam to column connections. And I thought that there were some issues with diaphragm. So one Friday afternoon I went into the 6th floor and I just started just drawing all the holes in the diaphragm. And you know, once I did that and went back to the office, it was very clear to me that there was no diaphragm left in this building, and that allowed me to start looking at the issues and start understanding what was happening to it. So it really is, you know, it's you measure it and you kind of try to figure it out as you go. So you know, it doesn't have to be beautiful. I tell you what, I am not a great artist, but it'll give the information you need. Here again, this is the Pantages Theater again. It had to meet the Actors Guild for hanging flats, and the gridiron, this is up in the stage house, did not match that. It was an old vaudeville house. So I had to go in and measure this thing. I spent about 2 months sitting on the lawn chair, 67 feet in the air, just measuring and trying to figure it all out. And so based on that, I was able to come up with, this is the drawing of the final changes to it. Everything in yellow is new steel. And you know, you can see the new line sets coming down with new openings in the grids for that. So you can really see that it really, that was the first step. No one had any idea what was really up there. And that was the first step in getting something that was actually buildable. So. And also, you know, as you're doing this investigation, what I'm showing here, it just kind of informs it. On the left, it's a flat tile arch floor, and I'm just measuring it, what the floor is, where it is, and then I take that information and I found a table in the Kidder Parker manual that I think I was able to find that tile. That floor, I was able to get some capacities, and from there I came up with design steps to confirm and to convince myself that it could carry the higher loads.
So the first thing we usually start with the actual condition assessment is just visual inspections. And you know, that's partly just walking around the building on the inside and out. Sometimes we have to access it from, you know, a lift or from a swing stage, or even from, you know, hanging on rope access or something like that. And then we have to record everything. So
yeah, and you know, you just have to go in and just start walking around the old building, just familiarize yourself with it. This is just kind of an idea of what our old theater looked like to start. Sometimes it's not pretty. And in this, I was up in the dome having some, I was concerned about some water penetrations in there. And so it's a reflected ceiling plan of the second dome. There's 3 domes in the Capitol, and just kind of laying out where the water penetration is and trying to get a sense of why and the issues that might be there. Also, you know, again, you want to photo document, and I say a lot. And what I found now, what I do is I photo document with my phone. I have a long lens on a good camera for distant shots, but I also videotape a lot now because, you know, I never get the right photo, right? I mean, I'm 2 inches off, 3 inches below what I need, but the video, a lot of times I'll just go through and video the whole scene, and it's often that I can find a frame that gives me what I need. So I really recommend that. Again, you know, take pictures that you can. This is the flat tile arch for a building that I had no clue what. There is no class in modern structural engineering. It doesn't have to do with preservation that you see a floor like this. So, you know, a riveted column with a flat tile arch. So, you know,
Yeah.
take pictures.
So one of the things often is helpful when you're taking pictures too is to put a tape in it or some other like visual cue. So this is just an example of that. And then, you know, be creative of how you take the photos too. This photo on the right here, you know, this was a tall, originally built as a hotel, but now an administrative building. And we were able to go up to the upper floors and kind of look down on this roof plaza that was leaking, and we could see, clearly you can see the areas that have efflorescence on it, and you know that that's the areas that there's been water standing. So.
Again, this is another project where you know, it had been not maintained, and just a really beautiful corbelled cornice on the top had to be taken apart, and you can see there was a small tree growing in this part of it, and so they took it down and then they rebuilt it. So you know, document as much as you can.
So when we're doing this, a lot of times we'll end up with just a lot of information, right? And we have to sort through it. So one of the things that we do a lot on projects is we'll actually use a database that we enter information into the field using either a tablet or your phone. To the left is an example. We had over 100 guest rooms that we were having to do a complete condition assessment with at the AHWAHNEE Hotel in Yosemite. So we went through and identified the materials and the key information. And this is just a small section of it. This goes on and talks about the ceilings and bathrooms and everything. But if I included the whole thing, you wouldn't be able to read any of it. So this is another example here on the right, a Fort Point, where I actually went out hand sketched where all of the cracks in the parapet were here, and then drew those in AutoCAD. These shaded areas here are where we went in and we removed some of the concrete to do additional destructive investigations in these areas. So the next thing we do is we do some non-destructive testing. The easiest to do is sounding, which can be as simple as knocking on a wall with your knuckles, or using some type of a hammer, either a rubber hammer or sometimes a small metal hammer. And there's more tools that are kind of readily and easily available inexpensively these days, like infrared camera, endoscope, some moisture meters, and some other things like that. This is just a couple examples of some infrared photos. This is the Holy Trinity Russian Orthodox Cathedral, which is a Louis Sullivan designed church here in Chicago. And this picture on the left is the infrared, and you can see kind of where the framing is just based on the difference in temperature in the dome here. So you can get helpful information without having to actually get up into the dome. You get a clue of how that's constructed. This is my old apartment where there was a water leak upstairs from me, and I was trying to prove to my landlord that he needed to repair this properly and take this out. So the first step was just, doing these infrared. You can tell specifically where the water is, where it's the bluer or purpler color. And then I took a moisture meter to it, and yeah, it's 33% moisture in there. That's way, and I picked this photo just because it was readable what the moisture meter was reading. There was one point in the wall where it was 80% moisture content. So obviously that was saturated. Similar condition here on the right. This is Herman Hall at the Navy Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And a moisture meter where we're looking at the wood on the sill here. Again, this is a similar condition where, you know, it's 33% moisture level. We know if it's over 14, that means the wood's probably rotted or rotting. And so this is just a different device, but the same basic procedure here.
You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can test the different materials as well. A lot of the old metals, you know, we used to be iron first in the 1800s and into really early 1920s, and then early steel started coming on in the last really 20 years of the 19th century, but really started happening in the first decade of the I'm sorry, the 19th century, first decade of the 20th century. But there was a lot of issues with carbon content, and so really what you want to do whenever you come across a metal is you want to get a metallurgy test. You want to have the equivalent phosphorus, equivalent carbon tested in there. But you can do a spark test, which is just taking a Dremel and running it across the material, and you get a spark field that comes from that, and you can tell from that what kind of what that material is. It gives you an idea. You know, you never want to weld to a cast or wrought iron, and you also don't want to weld to an early high carbon content steel because you'll crack it. So you know, it just kind of gives you an idea what you've got and what you're working with. I use a spark test early in a project to get a sense of what we have.
So the other step, the next step after doing kind of the non-destructive is to look at destructive testing. And there's two primary reasons that we do this. One is to kind of see behind finished materials, and the other is to actually remove some materials for lab testing. So in this case here, we're removing a section of mortar that we're going to send in for testing.
You know, and again, you know, you want to take concrete cores to understand the strength. You want to break the cores because you just don't know what the capacity is. And a lot of times, you know, so often you have to make a conservative guess if you don't actually do the material testing, and the conservative guess can cause things to calc out that they don't work when they actually do. So you want to spend the time and the money to take the samples that you need to and really open things up and see what's there. So
sometimes we get into some more specialized testing. This is me pretending to be an archaeologist for the day at Fort Point. I was under the supervision of a accredited archaeologist, just so you know. But so this was a condition where we didn't know what the foundations looked like under this elevated portion of the fort here, and so we just took out a section of cracked concrete there, and then I dug down into there just so we could see what that footing was, and then we photographed it and took notes and sketches and measurements and everything of this. So then we also, you know, obviously when I do a lot of materials testing, there's some materials testing we can kind of do on site, which we've kind of talked about a little bit. But there's a lot of things that we're going to send into a lab where they're going to do more advanced testing. So this is at Fort Point, and we're actually removing some of the biological growth off of this wall to send it in for testing to determine what it is so that we understand better how to treat it and get rid of it, hopefully. And these are a couple other examples. This is the Oregon State Hospital where we had brick and mortar that was painted. So this is actually a mortar sample that has paint on it, and we did the paint analysis of this to evaluate all the different layers of paint, so that we knew what we were going to kind of. We ended up having to go back and repaint that building, but we wanted to go with something closer to the color that was put on it shortly after it was constructed. And then to the right here is actually, they took some acid and got rid of all of the cement out of the mortar, and then graded all of the aggregate in there in the different sieve. And then they can actually take these, and they can color match them to kind of local sands that are known in the area, and that helps us determine what the new mortar composition should be.
We see a lot of wood structures, wood framing in masonry buildings and whatnot. And one of the Ron Anthony out in Colorado went to a seminar of his. He's a wood scientist, and I'm sure many of you know of him. He said, you know, that one of the reasons we lose so many buildings in the United States is that structural engineers don't understand how to grade wood and how to understand it. And one of the things you look at in there is, like Heidi said about moisture content. Well, with wood, you know, there's a 19% moisture content is the magic percentage, the magic number on that. Anything above that, decay fungi can grow, and insects can get in there, and it can start to decay. So you really want to. There's a number of slides that I'll show in this about that, but it's important to understand the wood. The wood condition, and to, you know, generally with old wood that's decayed, you really just need to replace it. But another thing to do on that is to check the wood species, because wood will look similar. And I'll tell you that generally structural engineers who don't have a background in this will take spruce pine fir #2, look in the catalog, and that's the capacity you get. And actually there's a number of woods that, especially a red pine, is really common in Minnesota, that is quite a bit stronger. And so what I do is I send this out to a retired wood scientist in Minnesota, Bob Seavey, and he'll go through and give me a species for it, and then I can take that and look up what the capacity is for that species. So it's an inexpensive test. He does it for, you know, I don't know what it is now, about $100 a sample, and you know, you can get about 15% extra capacity if you know the species. So. The other thing is wood grading. You know, historic wood is not stronger than modern wood, but it is generally clearer than modern wood, meaning there's less flaws. And so if you grade the wood, you know, we all do, again, structural engineers, SPF #2, and generally you can get a #1 or better. And so, and it's really easy to do. You know, you look for the number and the size of the knots, you checks and splits, angle of grain, and then you can increase the capacity up to 30%. So, you know, I've gotten up to about 45, almost 50% in a piece of wood, just by grading it and getting the species. I mean, generally, you know, if you can get 25% extra capacity, you're doing well. But hey, you know, it's a couple hours, it's $1,000 worth of work versus having to reinforce a complete floor.
So often we'll do testing for the systems within the building itself. There's a lot of different things we can do for this. This is just one example. This is the Oregon Cave Chateau, the Oregon Caves National Park in Oregon, of course. And this hotel is closed part of the year, and so there was some concern. You know, the water gets turned off. Are the water domestic piping and sprinkler piping, you know, what's the condition of it, because it's turned off part of the year and subject to freeze thaw and stuff. So they actually took several sections of the piping from different areas of the building and the different types of piping, and then they sent those to a lab to be tested. And I'll also just kind of reviewed how much, you know, buildup of gunk there was. Obviously this sprinkler pipe only gets about half of the water capacity through here, with the amount of debris that's in here. So.
Oh, that's gross. Don't want to drink through that.
Well, it's a sprinkler pipe. You wouldn't be drinking through it, but
well, I don't know. I might.
So the other thing that's really great to do if we can is to do some mock-ups during the design phase. This is at Fort Point, San Francisco. This is at the west face of the fort. It faces the Pacific Ocean. During storms, salt water is washed against this wall violently. You know, we always talk about in preservation, you know, don't sandblast your walls. This is a wall that is regularly sandblasted by nature. In the photo on the left, you'll see that there's like kind of some tractor marks here at the base here. That is because they just cleared the sand off the base here. The waves actually deposit sand here, and they just removed about 5 feet of sand that had accumulated against this wall. So obviously pretty extreme conditions, and we had a real fine balance between, you know, mortar that was hard enough that it wouldn't get washed out by the waves, and mortar that was too hard that it might damage the brick. So we did extensive testing of the brick and the mortar on this fort. We found historical information that they had done some mock-up panels of several different mortar types during the original construction of the fort back in the 1850s. One of which was a mortar that included some iron slag in it. So it was a very strong mortar. We actually found the old mortar patch on this wall. The mortar itself was in great condition, but as many of you would expect, the brick around it had defaced. So we redid the mock-up. We had 3 different scenarios of mortar that we put in here. And then we had the luxury on this project because we knew there was going to be a delay between the time we were doing this investigation and the time the project was funded, that we were actually able to leave this for a few years in real life conditions to see how it held up. So now to some case studies. So this project was one that another firm, not the one I was working for at the time, had designed a seismic upgrade to this Adobe Mission church here in California. And my firm that I was working for at the time was hired to do the construction management of this project by the mission parish here. And they got in and they started trying to insert all of this reinforcing into this adobe walls, and they found there was already existing seismic reinforcing in these walls. And this was a really unfortunate situation where they just hadn't investigated enough to find if there had been any previous seismic upgrades to the building. It would have probably really changed the project, or might not have even needed the project if they'd done that investigation up front. Just, they might not like that I use them as a bad example, but anyway, this is another church in California. This is First Church of Christ Scientists in San Francisco. Again, this is another project where actually this project was designed without the input of an architect at all. It was designed by a structural engineer who was also the contractor on the project. And he just designed all of these nice moment frames to go in here for the seismic work, and didn't figure out how the building was going to go back together around all of this. So I was brought in during construction phase to try to figure out how to put back decorative plaster pieces, decorative wood paneling, and all of these things, and try to fit them back in around all of this stuff that was added to the building. I can tell you, I worked really hard on this, and it still didn't turn out quite as well, obviously, as it would have if we'd started at the beginning, right? Similarly, same church, they had to remove and put some new roof decking on here to create a diaphragm on the roof. Historic clay tile, they pulled the old clay tile up. We were going to put it back down. But if you see the pile on the right here, obviously we get breakage when we do that. So we never have 100% replacement of the original tile on the roof here. And again, you know, they're partially put the roof back on, and they're like, oh, we don't have enough tile. Can you find us some new tile that matches this? Well, finding, you know, a custom glaze to match, and this was a, you know, a range of colors, it's not a single color, to, you know, in a really short time period, just, it's not possible. So in this case, we ended up having to put a new, much brighter glazed tile on the most hidden portion of the roof, and keep the historic tile on the most visible part. But you know, again, if we'd known up front that this was going to happen, and we'd been brought on earlier in the project, we could have worked with some of the clay tile manufacturers and probably come up with something way better and much closer to that.
So this is a project that many of you know about, was the state capitol facade renovation. And I was on the project early on. Like I said, as I was trying to understand the building, came across the guidebook and a conversation between Grunewald, Aus, and Cass Gilbert. He was saying Aus had sent a letter in 1901 saying, you know, this dome really isn't stable. It doesn't follow a catenary. So he made some recommendations on how to make it stable. So this is a little, again, a case study. So we'll go to the next slide. I'll show you. And so he recommended that copper anchors, tension rings, be put within the thickness of the outer dome to create tension that would prevent the blowing out of that dome. So that was kind of the next piece. But then the problem with that was I came across some shop drawings, early shop drawings, that they had replaced the copper rings to iron for cost savings. If you know, this was built in 1895 to 1905, and if you know, in that time there was a pretty bad recession going on. So because copper didn't oxidize, that was fine. But I had been up in the building, and like I said, or I showed you, I had mapped out how much moisture was in it. So I was really worried about those iron tension rods and or tension rings and the condition that they were in, and just kind of the dome stability. Here again is that showing you know, my reflected ceiling plan and a close-up of it, trying to understand kind of where we were and the issues that we had. As it turns out, and it was interesting, we had a testing company, AET, come out, and they opened up some of the tension rings, and they were fine, surprisingly. And I think it was because it was they were embedded between the outside marble and the interior tile backup, and I just don't think they were getting enough oxygen for them to corrode. But we did find that the early I-beams that were supporting the lantern at the top, it's kind of like a teepee of these sloped beams that were supporting that. Kind of the bottom 4 feet, a number of them were quite deteriorated, and so several of them had to be replaced. After I left HGA, Sean Cotton did that, and you know, it was a little bit of a luck that we found those, but again, you have to get up in the structure and you have to look around and you have to find everything you can. And I think the key that I'm trying to say here is that if you do your best and really look, then things will kind of jump out at you. And if you really do have to have a hands-on approach to these things, hands-off, just, you know, asking the architect to give you something when they're done and then see if you can just pop your structure in there, generally doesn't work in this kind of.
So this is another case study. So this building is the AHWAHNEE Hotel at Yosemite, and I actually did my master's thesis on this building and on the interiors of it. But one of the things that was going on when I first started studying this building was that there was a fire sprinkler project going on, and they were going to add fire sprinklers to this building. And they had done a lot of the kind of hands-on investigation. They crawled up in an interstitial space between the ceilings and the structure, and they figured out that they could, you know, these are all actually false beams on the ceiling. They, oh yeah, we can get sprinkler piping into those. There's room to get that. There's access to do it. They kind of done all of that part of it. But the piece that was missing is they hadn't done the historical research on this. So some of the sprinkler head locations that they were proposing was right in front of these stenciled medallions, which had been painted over time, but we hoped were still you know, underneath the paint here. So, you know, this just goes to show you, like, if they'd gotten out in the field and started plowing through these, these might have been destroyed for just a couple of sprinkler heads, when it was an easy fix, because we were still in the design phase, that we could move those sprinkler heads and respace them a little bit in this space. And that not only provided the new fire protection that we needed, but also preserved all of the original artwork in the space. So here's another case study. This is a project that I worked on in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was, we were doing a tenant build out on one floor of the building. And so the landlord really wanted to kind of fix up, and these steel windows were actually in really good condition. So it wasn't a major restoration of it. It was really kind of scrape them down, repaint them, and put some new weather stripping on them, and then put some interior storms on them. And so fortunately, the building owner and manager had all of the original drawings. This building, although it looks continuous, was actually built in about 4 or 5 stages. So we had several variations of drawings of all the different stages of the construction of the building. And in those drawings, I found a reference to these brown steel windows. And so with a little bit of research, I found a couple of Suites catalog sheets specific to this type of window, and how it, in all this great detail of how it was constructed and where the weather stripping was. Over time, the weather stripping had kind of become haphazard on these windows, and it was in some cases in the hinge pocket, so they didn't close all the way because the weather stripping they put on actually prevented the window from closing. So this was really helpful as we were doing the repairs on these, is to direct the contractor, like, no, this is where the weather stripping should be on the window so that it is a continuous seal and that it works properly. So what are we doing here on time? So this one's just a real quick. This is another project I worked on. This is a McCormick house. This is a really unique situation where the house was moved several blocks, and then it was attached to a large art museum that was built new next to it. And this is one of those things where, like, the people that were doing the work, they intended well, but they didn't kind of have the background in preservation, didn't do really the historical research they needed to, and didn't really fully understand kind of either the construction materials and techniques, or the actual historical significance of the building. So I did a full HSR on this building, and then worked with them for the first couple of stages of the restoration. So this is the building as it was when it was originally constructed. This is the attachment to the museum. So it was actually through the carport, which is the main entrance to the building, kind of the main focal point of the the building, which they had just completely covered up and wasn't really visible. So a couple of years ago, we went through a project where we actually detached the building, so it's now a freestanding building again. And then all of the interior walls have been moved around and stuff. So we went through the exercise of planning to remove them and put them back in their original location. I'm going to go actually back one. They had put some new partitions in there, and if you look at the grain on the wood on the left-hand picture and the grain on the wood on the right-hand picture, you'll notice that they're nowhere near similar. They didn't even bother to try to figure out which wood grain had originally been used. This is in Elmhurst, and it's elm wood, which was a very specific and purposeful thing that Mies picked for this. And the wild graining on it was actually a really integral part of the design of the interior space, which wasn't carried through in the remodel. So we're now going to redo all of that, which could have been avoided if they'd done it right 20 years ago, right? So that's all we got for now. I guess we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you both. That was really, really informative. A lot of great information. Again, just as a reminder, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can add it in the Q&A section. I don't see anything popping up yet, but I'm continuing to monitor. I think there's also an option to send them directly to Heidi and Chris. However, I would suggest not doing that because Chris won't be able to read them very easily on his phone, most likely.
I'm not even sure if I know how to read them. Here.
Yeah, so if you could send it, go ahead, Chris.
And just kind of as a to kind of close, I would say, well, I have 2 things to say. the first is, you can see that I'm with Leo A. Daly, and this is a shameless plug for Leo A. Daly. I think we've got a good stable of preservationists now, so we'd love to work with you and for you if you have any questions. But so that out of the way, I would say that, as we all go through our business day, running 1,000 miles an hour now, it's difficult sometimes to put the time into these buildings that they really need and the energy that they need. And I really, it's just my hope that we all find a place to be able to spend that time and set aside that cognitive energy and the professional time to really, I mean, those of us who are in preservation who do it almost to the person that I know of, because it's a passion. And if we can find our way through all the requirements of the day back to our passion and spend the time to do this, because we have a responsibility. We don't want to, these buildings have been given to us, gifted to us, and it's our responsibility to take care of them. And to the extent that we can, and we take this time to do this well, then we can pass them on to the next generation. So, I think that's really important. I think that's really an important piece that I want to kind of share with all of you. So.
And of course, I second all of that. But since Chris put in a shameless plug, I'm going to as well. So I worked for the first 11 years of my career in Minnesota. So some of you on this call probably know me, which is great. I am currently in the Chicago area, but I am relocating back to the Twin Cities. So I'm looking for work up in Minnesota. And obviously, I've got a huge background of preservation projects throughout the country. So if there's any project that you need our help on, a lot of our work, we also collaborate with other architects and engineers. So happy to help out wherever we can.
Thank you. And we do have a question that just popped in, so I will read that out. What is the best resource to know the proper moisture content for different woods? Do you have a recommendation for how you manage the repair of rotted wood?
So there actually is a publication that I found a few years ago that the forest, what is it? No, I'm forgetting the name of it. The wood forest thing out of Madison, Wisconsin. They put together a publication of like recommended moisture levels. And it actually varies depending on the atmospheric moisture, right? Because wood is going to absorb moisture from the air. So they have a whole chart of like, if your air moisture content is this and your wood moisture content is this, the ratio of that is okay, and those are that. So I'm sorry, I don't know the exact publication, but if you email me, I will look that up and send it to you.
I'll add to that. Generally, it's a rule of thumb that the wood will have about 20% of the air relative humidity. So if the relative humidity is, let's say, 55% just in general, then your moisture content is about 11%. And the reason it's good to know that is that if you have more than, if you're in a pretty dry area, which I think that the continental United States, the northern part of the country where we all are, is pretty dry in general, and we're not, and it doesn't fluctuate obviously day to day or even week to week. It's kind of I don't think it fluctuates much at all, but if you just take kind of the average moisture content in the area, and if you divide that by 5, and if the moisture you're getting with a moisture reader is moisture meter is higher than that, then you almost certainly have a source of moisture that you need to find, and you need to stop that. And as far as the repair of rotted wood, generally everything I've seen and done really can't repair rotted wood. You have to replace it. But putting in new wood to sister into it, or that kind of thing. So
yeah, I would add, be very, very, very careful with using consolidants. Because it can actually, if you don't get it cleared out well, it can actually trap moisture in the wood and cause more problems than it solves. So usually, if we're using consolidants at all, it's really small areas. It's going to be an area of something that's not structurally significant, and it's going to be a very small area. So.
And I would say that it's American Wood Council out of Madison, Wisconsin that
Thanks,
Heidi
Chris.
was mentioning. Yeah, they're very good, and they're quite helpful too. So, and they will do species samples for you, but they used to do it for free, and so they're generally it takes weeks to get. Whereas if you can find a local resource to be able to do that, and I'm happy to share Bob Seavey's information. He's like I said, a retired wood scientist, and does it quickly and relatively inexpensively. So.
Some of the old school carpenters really know their woods really well too. My dad's a woodworker, and he can spot a wood species pretty accurately, pretty quickly as well. So sometimes you just need to find somebody that's got a lot of experience with working with wood, and they can like at least get you in the right direction.
I'll make a pitch too for International Masonry Institute. They have an amazing group of researchers and craftsmen who really know their stuff. The nice thing about them is that they're supported by the Masons Union, and so they have the resources to be able to support people doing their work. And so I would find your regional rep, Mark Swanson up in our area, and it's his job to answer your questions and give you what you need. And Mark is anything having to do with masonry, he's my number one go-to guy, and they're completely free, all the information. So.
Yeah, Mark's great, and obviously he's based out of the Minneapolis office. And then the other person who's really great to work with is Amy Woods at IMI. She is actually specifically works with preservation projects. So she's a great source for historic masonry information. And she works very closely with Mark. So if you contact Mark, he might contact Amy and get you the information too. So either one of them are great to work with. I've worked with both of them. So.
That's great. One of the things I was thinking about as I was listening in is, well, one was just really echoing the importance of that historical research early on, not just in documentation, but the building itself. But oftentimes another client, not really a client, but another client are the state preservation offices or the local heritage preservation commissions and city staff that have to go through a review process. And I was city staff to HPC in my previous role, but we also do this here at the SHPO offices. We often get a much smaller picture of all the work and the research that has been put into a building. So just kind of a plug, because oftentimes, we need to ask all these questions that you as the specialist know, and it might not kind of always translate in an application. I don't know if you have any advice for that, if you've worked through processes or have any thoughts on, a lot of times you have to bring the reviewers, up to speed, so we kind of understand why you made the recommendations you made and the decisions you've made.
Right, and on a small project, we're not going to write necessarily a full, conditions report or even a full HSR on a small building, but certainly the larger the building and the more complex it is, the more that we need to do a full condition assessment. And hopefully that's part of it. HSR, which includes all the historical documentation and existing conditions documentation and everything. But it doesn't have to be compiled as an HSR. Those can happen as separate things that complement each other. But documenting that in a report, especially in a larger project where you have a large team and you need everybody to have resources available to them to review that, that's really important to document everything.
Yeah, and I would say just, reach out to SHPO, reach out to, the professionals there, reach out early so that, they're a resource as well. And the more you can gain their confidence that you understand what's happening and that you're considering it, and also they will bring things up that you don't necessarily hadn't thought about, and then you can incorporate that. If you bring them in early and you bring them in as a collaborative team member, then it's so much easier, and they're very knowledgeable. Natasha, Sarah, Leslie, and then Amy, and others just they're part of the team, and they're as passionate about, well, easily as passionate as we are about it. So it makes it fun. And you know, again, bring in everybody you can that has some ideas, because there's so much we don't know and so much we're not aware of. And so working together is a much better product.
Yeah, thanks for that SHPO plug.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
and
good at it.
you know, SHPO, but also, you know, if you're working with a local historic preservation commission, as a former preservation commissioner myself, I have to say, you know, bringing them up to speed with things and early is helpful as well. Any reviewer that you're working with on your project.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Well, I was going to mention, I know the attendees cannot see who else is participating in the session, and we were trying to work on that. But we did have 43 people in the session, which is great. So we all just have to imagine that we had a really nice, lecture room with a lot of interested people. But I don't see any more questions coming up, so we can retire early unless Chris or Heidi, you have any last remarks. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was great to meet both of you.
Great.
Oh, Chris, do you have something?
Nope. I just wanted to thank you, Amy, for hosting this. It's great to be a part of this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I hope everyone on the call can participate in the remaining sessions. We're really excited about the keynote this afternoon and the remaining sessions through Friday. I did get a post in the chat. A couple people said excellent presentation also. Some kudos there to pass along. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Great. That went well.